Mrs. McDonald didn't seem to hear him. She was pacing up and down, talking loudly to herself. He'll have to retire now. 2 years of training and grooming wasted. Wasted! What will you do with him now? You can't put him in shows, miss, said Gamble, revving up his excitement again. Will you eat him? We had this cat once, right? And be quiet, you awful child, screeched Mrs. McDonald, jabbing Gamble in the chest with a stubby finger. Oh, please, miss, said Gamble, his lip wobbling. Don't be like that, miss. I was just trying to help. I couldn't stand it if you were mad at me, miss. Gamble looked like he was about to cry. I couldn't believe it, but I actually felt sorry for him. Mrs. McDonald, it was me as well, I said, looking at the floor. You too? You little... she screamed. Now, I'll never know the reasons for what happened next. Maybe Mr. Wiggles understood what Gamble had said about his cat. Maybe he was scared of the noise of Mrs. McDonald screaming like that. Or maybe he just saw the donut, noticed no one was looking at him and thought he'd make a break for it. Anyway, with surprising speed for such a fat rodent, he darted forward and bit off a wodge of the donut. Then he shot away behind the sink and along the worktop. Mrs. McDonald dived towards him, but she was too late. Mr. Wiggles had already squeezed himself through the hole in the wall where the pipes go. She hauled open the door of the cupboard under the sink and desperately pulled out the paintbrushes and palettes and glue sticks, but there was no sign of him. From the other side of the hollow wall, we could hear a scuffling noise, which became quieter and quieter before turning into silence. He's gone, said Mrs. McDonald softly. Miss Clegg sniffed. They always go somewhere peaceful to die. Not really helpful, I thought. There was a thud as Mrs. McDonald fainted and collapsed to the floor. Rosie ran off and returned with Mr. Noblet. What's going down, guys? He asked. Well, began Rosie. Gamble stamped on her foot to shut her up and told his version of what had happened. By the time he'd finished his story about how the guinea pig had gone for Mrs. McDonald's throat and he'd had to beat it off with the donut, Mrs. McDonald had woken up. Where am I? She said in a floaty voice. Where's Mr. Wiggles? Who shaved him? Crumbs, said Mr. Noblet, biting his lip. She's delirious. Did you see anything, Mrs. Clegg? From over Miss Clegg's shoulder, I could see that she'd used her phone to take a photo of Mrs. McDonald when she was lying on the ground. She was just posting it on Facebook with the tag, My Teacher, Working Flat Out. Nope, she said, sliding her phone into her pocket. I was in the bog. Mr. Noblet looked like he'd just swallowed something sour. Covered in glitter and feathers, said Mrs. McDonald, her head lolling about. You poor thing, said Mr. Noblet, helping Mrs. McDonald to her feet. You've been working too hard. Home to rest, I think. I'll take your class. Miss Clegg, a hand. Miss Clegg tutted loudly and huffed over to the stricken Mrs. McDonald. Together they helped her out of the classroom. When they'd gone, Rosie Taylor turned on Gamble and angrily pushed her hair back. You're lying, and I'm going to tell Mr. Noblet what really happened. Try it and I'll smash your teeth out, said Gamble. Yeah, Rosie, said Jane. Button it, or else. I mentally added threatening people to the list of things Jane had started doing since I'd given her a piece of the deadly donut on Monday. Maybe we should try and get Mr. Wiggles back, I said. You know, for Mrs. McDonald. Good idea, said Gamble. You still owe me a donut, though. This one's covered in guinea pig spit. Even I won't eat that. And with that, he threw the remaining lump into the bin. Even though the donut had been in Gamble's armpit and Mr. Wiggles's mouth, I felt my stomach muscles clench. Binning donuts is a horrible crime. It's like taking a beautiful painting and blowing your nose with it. And don't forget you owe me 49, Jane said, fluttering her eyelashes. Added to the one I was desperate for myself, I was now on minus 51 donuts. I bit my lip. There was another problem. My £20 was in Mrs. McDonald's desk. If she'd gone home, how could she go to the shop to get them for me? Things were getting worse by the second. For the rest of the day, Mr. Noblet got us to design a machine we'd like to invent. This is the kind of doss-about lesson that head teachers always give you so they can sit at the front and get on with paperwork. By the way, I don't want to sound big-headed, but my machine was brilliant. It was called the Multi-Blaster. All you had to do was zap something with a laser and it'd make hundreds of copies of it. I thought it'd be useful getting all the extra doughnuts I needed. Rosie Taylor's invention was a set of X-ray glasses that could see through walls and round corners. Kevin Harrison invented a special sick bag that turned your puke into money. Gamble designed a new missile for blowing up cows. Don't ask. While Jane came up with a handheld device that could tell where your boyfriend was at all times. I wasn't sure I liked her invention. The room was totally quiet apart from Gamble talking to Miss Clegg. What's she doing tonight, miss? Have you got a date with your boyfriend? None of your business. Have you got a boyfriend, miss? I bet you have. You're not as beautiful as Mrs. MacDonald, but there must be someone out there who fancies you, miss. If you must know, Darren, I'm going to a supermarket. Now, can we please colour in these cows' brains and get this over with? Gamble stood up. At first, Miss Clegg looked like she was going to stop him, but then she just huffed out her cheeks and gave up. He walked over to me. Hey, Roman, want to hang out after school? I said, concentrating on my machine and hoping he'd get bored and bother someone else. I've got this awesome idea to get the doughnuts. Yuck, said Rosie. Something stinks around here. Shut it, fart burger, said Campbell. You're gross, hissed Rosie. I'm going to sharpen my pencil. Don't you dare touch my stuff with your greasy fingers while I'm gone. Spying on everyone else's work on the way, Rosie walked the long way round to the bin. As soon as she'd stopped, Gamble flung one of her rubbers at her. It smacked her on the back of the head, which caused her to drop her pencil sharpener into the bin. Bullseye, he said, rushing back to his place. High five, Miss Clegg. Miss Clegg looked at his hand like he'd just used it to clean out a toilet. No throwing, Darren, she said unconvincingly. Hey, everything groovy out there, guys, said Mr. Noblet, glancing up from his work. Gamble glared at Rosie. She pursed her lips, picked some imaginary bits of rubber out of her hair and reached into the bin. What happened next was incredible. There was a clang as the bin flew to its side. About 1 millisecond later, Rosie let out a deafening scream and shot into the air, waving her hand about. It took me a moment to realise there was something hanging off the end of her finger. It was something very fat, very pink and very bald, with all kinds of stuff stuck to it. Mr. Wiggles! He must have sniffed out the doughnut, then crawled into the bin to get it. Get it off me! Shrieked Rosie, swinging the fat, bald guinea pig around and around her head. Mr. Wiggles hung on, his teeth sunk deeply into her flesh. Put him back in the cage, I cried. This was my chance to finally do something good. Chop her finger off, called Gamble. Don't they carry rabies? Asked Miss Clegg. I feel sick, said Kevin the Volcano Harrison, turning a funny shade of green. Rosie was going completely nuts by now, flapping her hand back and forth, so the guinea pig was a total blur. I hate rats, she squealed. Stay still, said Mr. Noblet, grabbing Mr. Wiggles and trying to pull him off Rosie's hand. The guinea pig must have let go, because all of a sudden Mr. Noblet was stumbling backwards, holding Mr. Wiggles up in the air like he was the World Cup. But then he slipped on a lumpy puddle that Kevin the Volcano Harrison had just created on the floor. Mr. Noblet's feet flew up in the air above his head, and he tumbled over in a heap. Mr. Wiggles flopped onto the floor and zigzagged back across the classroom as fast as his fat little body could manage. When he reached Rosie, she actually went to stamp on him, but Gamble rugby tackled her out of the way just in time. Meanwhile, Mr. Wiggles grabbed the rest of the doughnut from the floor by the bin and squeezed through a gap in the skirting board, dragging the doughnut behind him. For a moment, the only sound in the room was Rosie sobbing. Awesome, said Gamble. At 3:20, Gamble was waiting for me by the gates on the way out of school, a big goofy grin across his face. You need doughnuts, right? Yeah, 51 of them. 52, he said. Mr. Wiggles loves them, so I'm going to use one as bait and get him back. For Gamble, this was actually good thinking. At home, we used chocolate to catch mice and rats. Then I electrocute them, run them over on my skateboard and that sort of stuff. But I won't do that with Mr. Wiggles, because I love Mrs. MacDonald. Where are we trying to get the doughnuts, I asked, trying to ignore most of what he just said. Supermarket, said Gamble, twitching and blinking like a sick rabbit. It's next to my house. The bus goes right there. Come round mine after. I don't think I'd be allowed, I said. Well, not without getting a set of injections first. Give us your mobile, he said. Reluctantly, I took it out of my rucksack and handed it over. He searched the numbers and dialed my house. Someone answered and Gamble started speaking. "It's all right, Mrs. Roman's mum, it's Darren Gamble. Roman's coming round my house for tea and we're having a roast pheasant." I heard my mum's muffled voice say, "Ooh, very posh." "Yes," said Gamble. "Dad ran it over in his car last night." I slapped my hand against my forehead. Wow. I knew Gamble was a bit on the scuzzy side, but I'd no idea he ate roadkill.